The brunch was at Café Lumière, my mother's favorite spot for performing motherhood in front of her society friends. Crystal chandeliers, white linen tablecloths, mimosas that cost more than some people's hourly wage. It was the kind of place where women wore designer labels like Armour and judged each other's children like Olympic sports. I hadn't wanted to come. I never wanted to come to these things. But Mom had insisted. Something about keeping up appearances, about showing her friends that even her difficult daughter could be civilized for a Sunday afternoon. I sat at the end of the table, nursing a black coffee while the other women sipped champagne cocktails and discussed their children's accomplishments. Jennifer's son had just made partner at his law firm. Diane's daughter was engaged to a surgeon. Patricia's twins were both at Harvard. Then came my mother's turn. "Well, you all know about Serena," Mom said, beaming. Serena was my older sister, the golden child, the one who'd followed the script perfectly. Married a wealthy banker, produced 2 photogenic grandchildren, lived in a house that had been featured in Architectural Digest. She's chairing the Children's Hospital Gala this year. The governor's wife is co-chairing with her. Appropriate murmurs of approval rippled around the table. And then there's Elise. Mom's voice shifted, taking on that particular tone she reserved for discussing disappointments. She gestured toward me like I was an exhibit at a museum of failures. "She's my failure child. No ambition, no future. Still, figuring things out, at 32. Unlike her sister." The women nodded sympathetically. Some of them shot me pitying glances. Others looked away embarrassed on my behalf. Jennifer actually patted my mother's hand as if Mom were the victim here. "It's so hard," Patricia agreed. "When one child excels and the other doesn't. You wonder where you went wrong." I sipped my coffee. The ceramic was warm against my palms, grounding me while the familiar humiliation washed over my skin. "At least your boutique is doing well, Margot," Diane offered, changing the subject. "I heard you're expanding to a second location?" Mom's face lit up. This was her other favorite topic. Margot's boutique, the high-end fashion store she'd opened 5 years ago with her business partner, Helen. "Yes. The new location in the Arts District opens next month. We've already signed leases for a third in Westfield. The brand is really taking off." I set down my coffee cup and pulled out my phone. Under the table where no one could see, I typed an email to Gerald Chin, my accountant. "Discontinue all silent funding to Margot's boutique. Effective immediately. Notify their bank that the line of credit guarantee is withdrawn." The reply came in under a minute. "Confirmed. Monthly investment of $95,000 terminated. Credit line guarantee of $400,000 withdrawn. They'll receive formal notice by end of business today." I was reaching for my coffee again when Mom's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then started ringing with a call from Helen, her business partner. "Excuse me, I need to take this," Mom said, frowning at her screen. She stepped away from the table, and I watched through the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows as her expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching panic. The waiter arrived with dessert menus. I ordered the chocolate soufflé. It seemed like a good day for something sweet. In our family there was Serena and then there was everyone else. Serena was born first, born beautiful, born knowing exactly how to play the game. She had Mom's cheekbones and Dad's business instincts and an innate understanding of social currency that I never possessed. By the time she was 16, she could work a charity gala better than most adults. By 22, she'd married into one of the oldest families in the state. By 30, she was exactly what Mom had always wanted. A perfect reflection of her own aspirations. I was born 4 years later, an afterthought, a surprise that never quite fit the family mold. Where Serena was graceful, I was awkward. Where she was social, I was solitary. Where she saw networking opportunities, I saw exhausting performances that drained my soul. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the background music of my childhood. It played at breakfast when Serena got straight A's and I got A-minuses. It played at dinner when Serena recounted her social triumphs and I had nothing to report. It played at holidays when relatives asked about our futures and my parents could only beam about Serena's prospects while awkwardly changing the subject when it came to mine. But I had something Serena didn't. I had a mind for numbers. While she was learning which fork to use at formal dinners, I was teaching myself to code in the small hours of the night. While she was perfecting her tennis serve for country club matches, I was building my first trading algorithm in my bedroom, testing theories about market patterns that my high school teachers couldn't understand. While she was getting a degree in art history that she'd never use, I was quietly becoming fluent in a language that most people never knew existed, the language of money. My parents never noticed. Why would they? They had Serena to display at parties, Serena to brag about to friends, Serena to validate their parenting. I was the difficult one, the strange one, the one who'd rather spend Friday nights debugging code than attending debutante balls. When I was 19, I made my first $50,000. A trading algorithm I'd developed had performed beyond my expectations, turning a small inheritance from my grandmother, the only family member who'd ever truly seen me, into a nest egg that would change my life. I told no one. By 25, that nest egg had grown to $2 million. I'd refined my algorithms, diversified into multiple strategies, started generating returns that would have made professional traders jealous. I still lived in a modest apartment. Still drove a used car. Still wore clothes from the clearance rack. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned the power of invisibility. The less my family expected of me, the more freedom I had to build something real. By 30, I was managing $47 million through a private investment firm I'd established under the name Lighthouse Capital. I had a small team, just Gerald, my accountant, and Marcus, a trader I'd recruited from Goldman Sachs. We operated out of a nondescript office in a building my family would never visit, generating returns that consistently beat the S&P 500 by double digits. And when my mother opened Margot's boutique 5 years ago, struggling to secure funding because banks didn't believe in her business plan, I became her silent savior. Mom had always dreamed of owning a boutique. It was her passion project, the thing she talked about at dinner parties for decades but never actually pursued. Then, when she turned 55 and found herself questioning what she'd actually accomplished beyond raising children and hosting charity events, she finally decided to make it real. The problem was capital. Dad had money, of course, but he'd made it clear that he wouldn't throw good money after a hobby. The banks were skeptical of a first-time entrepreneur in her mid-50s with no retail experience. The investors Mom approached through her social network were polite but ultimately dismissive. I watched her struggle for months. Watched her pitch to friends who'd known her for decades, only to be turned down with sympathetic smiles. Watched her confidence erode with each rejection. Watched the dreams slowly dying in her eyes. And despite everything, the years of dismissal, the constant comparisons to Serena, the failure child comments that had become part of her regular vocabulary, I couldn't stand by and watch her fail. Because underneath the resentment, underneath the hurt, she was still my mother. The woman who had stayed up with me when I was sick, even if she compared my temperature to how Serena never got fevers. The woman who had driven me to math competitions, even if she spent the drive talking about Serena's dance recitals. The woman who, in her own limited way, loved me, she just didn't know how to show it without filtering everything through her disappointment. And some foolish part of me still hoped that if I helped her succeed, she might finally see me as something more than a disappointment. That one day she would look at me with the same pride she reserved for Serena. That I could earn my way into her love. I structured the investment carefully. Through a series of shell companies and intermediaries, I became Margot's boutique's primary silent investor. $95,000 per month in operating capital, deposited like clockwork through an LLC called Evergreen Partners. A $400,000 credit line guarantee that allowed Mom to secure inventory financing she never could have obtained on her own. Over 5 years, that added up to $5.7 million in direct investment, plus the credit guarantees that enabled another $2 million in borrowed capital. The boutique expanded from 1 location to 3. Mom was featured in fashion magazines. She spoke at women's entrepreneurship conferences about building a business from nothing. From nothing. She actually said that. While I was quietly depositing $95,000 into her business account every single month. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so much. At every family gathering, Mom would hold court about her business success while barely acknowledging my presence. At every holiday dinner, she'd compare my lack of direction to her entrepreneurial courage. At every brunch with her society friends, I was the cautionary tale. The example of what happened when a child didn't inherit their mother's drive. I absorbed it all. Year after year, I absorbed the insults and the dismissals and the public humiliations, telling myself that my mother's happiness was worth more than my pride. telling myself that being the silent benefactor was its own reward. I was 32 years old when I finally stopped believing that lie. Mom returned to the table looking pale. Her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her mimosa. "Everything all right, Margot?" Jennifer asked. "Fine. Just a small business matter." But her voice was thin, stretched like taffy. She avoided eye contact with everyone at the table, especially me. The conversation resumed. Children, grandchildren, vacation homes, charitable donations, but Mom was clearly elsewhere. Her phone kept buzzing with calls she let go to voicemail. Her coffee sat untouched, growing cold. When the brunch finally ended and the other women dispersed to their Mercedes and Teslas, Mom grabbed my arm in the parking lot. "Something strange is happening," she said. "Our primary investor just pulled out. All funding. No explanation, no warning, just gone. Helen is panicking. The new location is supposed to open in 3 weeks and suddenly we don't have operating capital." I nodded slowly. That does sound concerning. I don't even know who these investors are. They came through some company called Evergreen Partners and now they're just withdrawing everything. $95,000 a month, Elise. That's more than $1 million a year. How am I supposed to replace that? I looked at my mother, at the panic in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Something colder. Something that had been frozen inside me for decades and was only now beginning to thaw. "Maybe ask your successful daughter," I said quietly. "The one with ambition and a future. I'm sure Serena can help." I got in my car and drove away, leaving my mother standing in the parking lot with her phone already ringing again. The next week was chaos. For Mom at least. I watched from a comfortable distance as her world started to crumble. First, the bank called about the credit line. Without the guarantee from Evergreen Partners, they were reducing her available credit from $400,000 to $50,000, barely enough to stock a single location, let alone 3. Mom spent hours on the phone with bankers, trying to understand how a guarantee she'd never questioned could simply vanish. Then the landlord started asking questions. The new Arts District location had been secured with a deposit that came from Evergreen Partners funding. Without continuing investment, could Margot's boutique actually afford the lease? Mom had to provide personal guarantees she'd never planned on making. Then Helen, her business partner, began making exit noises. "I didn't sign up for this kind of risk, Margot. You told me we had stable backing. You told me our funding was secure for at least 5 more years." Mom called me 3 times that week. I let each call go to voicemail. "Elise, I need to talk to you. Something's happening with the business and I need family right now. Please call me back." "Elise, it's Mom again. Helen might be leaving the partnership. The bank is threatening to reduce our credit even further. I don't understand what's happening. Call me. Elise, please. I know we've had our differences, but I need your help. You're good with numbers. Everyone says so. Maybe you could look at our books, figure out what's going on. Please." Everyone says so. The irony almost made me laugh. My mother had spent 30 years telling everyone I was a failure, and now she wanted to leverage my numerical skills to save her business. Serena called too. That was unexpected. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me, Elise. Mom's boutique is falling apart and it started right after that brunch you attended." He called me crying. Crying. I haven't heard Mom cry since Grandma died. Maybe she should have thought about that before publicly calling me her failure child, in front of a table full of society women. Silence on the line. Then, she didn't mean it like that. She's meant it like that for 32 years, Serena. The only thing that's changed is that I've finally stopped pretending it doesn't matter. I hung up before she could respond. Mom showed up at my apartment 2 weeks after the brunch. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, designer clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them, hair that hadn't seen a stylist in days. I'd never seen my mother look less than perfect in public. This was a woman who reapplied lipstick before checking the mail. "Can I come in?" she asked when I opened the door. I stepped aside and watched her enter my apartment. She looked around with barely concealed surprise. The comfortable furniture, the original art on the walls, the high-end kitchen appliances visible through the open floor plan. "This is nice," she said. "Nicer than I expected." "What did you expect? A cardboard box?" She had the grace to look embarrassed. I just meant, you never talk about your life. I assumed things were difficult. You assumed what you wanted to assume. It made for a better story at brunch. Mom sat down on my sofa without being invited. Her hands were shaking. Elise, the business is falling apart. Our main investor pulled out without warning. Helen is threatening to leave. The bank is calling in loans. The new location might not open. Everything I've built for the past 5 years is crumbling, and I don't understand why. I sat in the armchair across from her. And you came to me because? Because Serena said you might know something. Because the timing is too coincidental. Because, she stopped, studying my face. Because you're not surprised. You're not surprised at all, are you? I let the silence stretch between us. Who is Evergreen Partners? Mom asked quietly. I stood and walked to my home office. From the filing cabinet, I pulled a folder I'd prepared for this moment. I handed it to my mother and watched her open it. Inside, the Articles of Incorporation for Evergreen Partners LLC. The operating agreement listing Lighthouse Capital as the sole member. The ownership documents for Lighthouse Capital, clearly showing my name as founder and managing partner. 5 years of bank statements showing $95,000 monthly transfers to Margot's boutique. Mom's face went white. Then gray. She looked like she might actually be sick. This is. She couldn't finish the sentence. $5.7 million, I said. Over 5 years. Plus a $400,000 credit guarantee that allowed you to secure bank financing you never would have qualified for on your own. Your boutique didn't succeed because of your entrepreneurial genius, Mom. It succeeded because your failure child was writing checks every month to keep it alive. She was crying now. Tears streaming down her face, smearing the mascara she'd probably applied out of habit even while her world collapsed. Why? She whispered. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I had nothing to offer. I wanted to know if you would ever value me for something other than what I could give you. I sat back down, keeping my voice steady even as something old and wounded twisted in my chest. And now I know. You never would have. I could have handed you a check for $1 million, and you still would have found a way to compare me unfavorably to Serena. That's not true. It is true. For 32 years I've been your disappointment. Your cautionary tale. The daughter you bring up at brunch to make your successful daughter shine brighter. I leaned forward. Do you know what I'm actually worth, Mom? Not what you assumed, not what you told your friends, but what's actually in my accounts. She shook her head, clutching the folder like it might disappear. $47 million. I manage $47 million through Lighthouse Capital. My personal net worth is just over $12 million. I've been quietly building one of the most successful private investment firms in this city while you've been telling your friends I have no ambition and no future. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the coffee table. She stared at me like she'd never seen me before. Like I was a stranger who'd replaced the failure daughter she thought she knew. I don't understand. How is this possible? You never said anything. You never showed any sign. Because you never asked. The words came out harder than I intended. You were so busy being disappointed in me that you never once asked what I actually did. Never once showed curiosity about my life. You just assumed I was failing because that fit the narrative you'd already written. She sat in silence for a long moment, tears still falling. The folder lay scattered on the coffee table between us. 5 years of secret generosity reduced to bank statements and legal documents. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible, broken. I'm sorry. Elise, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. That's different. I kept my voice steady even as old wounds throbbed beneath the surface. You needed me to be a failure so Serena could be a success. You needed someone to look down on so you could feel like you'd done something right as a mother. I was your measuring stick, Mom. The low bar that made Serena look higher. She flinched at each word, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not after 32 years of silence. I stood and walked to the window. The city stretched below, indifferent to the earthquake happening in my living room. I gave you $5.7 million because I loved you. Because despite everything I wanted you to succeed. I wanted to see you happy even if I couldn't be the reason for that happiness. And you used that success as a platform to publicly humiliate me. What do I have to do? Mom asked. To fix this. To save the business. To make things right with you. Please, Elise. Tell me what you want. I turned from the window. I want you to understand that my generosity is over. No more silent funding. No more anonymous guarantees. If Margot's boutique survives, it survives on its own merits. But without that funding, we'll have to close the new location. We might have to close everything. 5 years of work gone. Then maybe you'll understand what it feels like to build something from actual nothing. The way I did. Without parents who believed in me. Without family money. Without anyone in my corner except myself. She flinched like I'd slapped her. However, I continued, I'm willing to consider a different arrangement. A proper investment with proper terms, between two adults who see each other clearly. Hope flickered in her eyes. What kind of arrangement? Market rate terms. Equity stake in the business proportional to my investment. A seat on whatever advisory board you establish. And, I paused, making sure she was listening. A public acknowledgement of my role. Not hidden behind shell companies and anonymous LLCs. Lighthouse Capital as a named investor with my name attached. She nodded slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair. There's one more thing. I walked back to my chair and sat down, meeting her eyes directly. No more failure child comments. No more comparing me to Serena. No more using me as the cautionary tale at your brunch performances. If you want my investment, you treat me with the same respect you'd show any other investor worth $12 million. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood, crossed the room, and did something she hadn't done since I was a child. She hugged me. It was awkward and stiff, and neither of us quite knew where to put our arms, but it was something. I've been a terrible mother to you, she said into my shoulder. I don't know how to fix that. But I want to try. Trying is a start, I said. We'll see what comes after. The Arts District location of Margot's boutique opened 3 months late, but it opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony featured a new addition to the press materials, in partnership with Lighthouse Capital. Mom introduced me to the crowd, not as her failure daughter, but as her brilliant investment partner who saw potential when others didn't. It was a small thing, a few sentences in a speech that most people forgot by the time they reached the champagne table. But for me, it was everything. The business restructuring was painful. Helen left the partnership, taking her 30% stake with her. Mom had to scale back plans for the third location. But the core business survived, and more importantly, it was now built on solid ground. Real investment, real equity, real accountability. The family dynamics took longer to shift. Serena was initially suspicious of my sudden success, as if I'd somehow invented a $47 million investment firm overnight just to upstage her. Dad was characteristically silent, processing the revelation that his overlooked daughter was now worth more than his entire retirement portfolio. But slowly things changed. Mom started calling me for advice, not just about the boutique but about life. We had lunch every other week at Café Lumière, at the same table where she'd called me her failure child. Now she introduced me to her friends as my daughter Elise, the investor. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Serena eventually came around. We had dinner last month, just the two of us without parents or spouses or children, and actually talked like adults for the first time in our lives. I always knew you were smart, she admitted. I just never thought about what you were doing with it. You were always so quiet, so separate. I assumed you wanted to be left alone. I did want to be left alone, I said. Because every time I tried to participate, I was compared to you. It was easier to disappear than to compete in a game I couldn't win. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry. I didn't know it felt that way. You didn't ask. But I said it without bitterness this time. Nobody asked. As for Lighthouse Capital, business continues to grow. We've expanded our team to 7 people now. Our assets under management have crossed $60 million. Last quarter, Forbes reached out about including me in a feature on self-made women in finance. I agreed to the interview. It was time to stop hiding. The journalist asked me about my journey, about building a firm from nothing, about the challenges of being a woman in quantitative finance. But the question that stuck with me was this: what made you finally decide to go public with your success? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I spent years hiding because I thought invisibility protected me. It did in some ways. But it also kept me trapped in a story other people wrote about me. Coming forward wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally writing my own story. The article ran last week. Mom bought 50 copies and handed them out to everyone at her next brunch. "This is my daughter," she told her friends, pointing to my picture on page 47. "The investor. He's brilliant. I always knew she would do something extraordinary." I wasn't there for the brunch. I had better things to do than perform for society women. But she sent me a photo of herself holding the magazine, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. Maybe ever. I saved the photo. Not because I needed the validation anymore. I'd stopped needing that years ago. But because it represented something I'd stopped hoping for. A mother who was finally proud of the daughter she actually had, not the daughter she'd wanted me to be. Last Sunday, Mom and I had brunch together at Café Lumière. Just the two of us. She sat across from me at the same table where she called me her failure child, and she told me about her week, asked about mine, and listened, when I talked about a new investment strategy one was testing. "I don't understand half of what you just said," she admitted, laughing. "But I can tell you love it. That's enough for me." It was such a small thing. Such a simple acknowledgement. But after 32 years of being invisible, it felt like the sun breaking through clouds I'd stopped noticing were there. Some victories are worth $47 million. Others are worth more. This one was both.